Hello everybody. In order to start getting your ring cast in plaster, you need to get some of the materials that you'll find over here. It does say Lost Wax Casting Supplies along here. You'll open this up. On this side you're going to have the flasks, which are kind of our metal containers. And then you also have these rubber sprue bases that you will need. On this side you should have your sprue wax, and this is also where we keep our measuring device, so we make sure that we know how much we actually have on the project itself, or in terms of how much the wax weighs, because you have to add the sprue wax with it, because your metal will take that up. So you have to make sure you include that weight. So I'm going to show you where the lamps are at, and then we'll get set up for the demonstration. Okay, over in this area is where we keep our lamps. We keep most of our spray paint over there. This one you just turn and pulls out like this, and then down in this area, you'll typically find this container. It should have some matches in here. It'll have some of these tea lamps that are here. It will also have kind of our glass oil lamps that we use. So just bring the whole container out because you're going to need it. Okay, you're also going to need some clay because within that rubber sprue base, you put a little bit of clay in there so your sprues fit. It doesn't matter if you grab red clay or white clay, but when you open it up, especially if you haven't had pottery before, you just kind of want to look inside, and if there's a lot of water in here, this isn't the right one. There are two different kinds, and that one's just slip. I'm just going to reach in here with my finger. I'm just going to grab about this much clay. You don't need that much. Anything you don't use, just throw it away. Make sure the lid goes back on here, tight, so it doesn't dry the clay out. And we need a couple more things, and we'll get started. Okay, last thing, I think, is you're going to need to have the plaster. This is the container that the plaster is in. You always got to make sure you grab it out of here. It's usually a pretty heavy cylinder. This is a machine that vibrates the flask when it has the plaster to get any air bubbles off of your project, so they don't turn into these solid pieces of metal you need to file off. So all this stuff is just kind of shoved in here. You'll end up pulling this off. And then you can either do it on the black table here, or you can do it by the sink, and that should be all. So let's get those rings attached onto the sprues, and we'll get this all cast up. Okay, so these are the two rings I'm going to cast. Again, you have to find somebody in class that is going to cast in the same metal as you are. So whether that's nickel, silver, brass, or copper. Here's my sprue wax. I'm going to open it up, and I'm just going to grab one of these red ones. Any leftover, just put right back in that container. And what I usually do is that you take your flask, and you're going to be trying to decide on how much you're going to need. Now, the ring cannot stay out of the flask because you're going to fill this whole thing up with plaster, and you also need to give yourself, like 3/4 of an inch on top. So your sprue ends up not being very long, and you can always cut it later on. So I'm going to grab this much. I'm just going to kind of rip it off with my finger. Red wax is very soft. And I need to attach it onto this. Now when I attach it, depending on the kind of ring you have, you want to attach it into usually the band. But if it was a pretty heavy design on the top, like this one, this one is more of a complex ring because it's cut on the inside here. So it's a little heavy on this side. Here's another complex ring where the kind of melted wax on top did a little bit of a sculpture, added some negative space. The band itself has some engraving, and it's a little bit thinner along the side here. Something like this, you'd want to try to stick it along the side here because you want a lot more metal being able to flow into this area because it's such a heavier area. And obviously you need to flow into here, but you don't want to necessarily put it on the very bottom here, because it's filling up so much, and sometimes the metal in here will cool down before it can fill up that whole area. Okay, so with the basic one, it doesn't matter so much because it should be even all the way through. I'm going to take my lamp here. I'm going to take one of my matches, my only match apparently, and I want to get set up just because I only got one match. Is that with the lamps, it does have this part right here where when you twist this, the inside wick goes up and down. So and sometimes it goes too low and it doesn't catch, so you have to kind of unscrew this and kind of pull it up a little bit. You'll get some oil in your hand, just wash it off and you're fine, it's not a big deal. You never want these to smoke. If they're smoking, pull that wick down and it'll be a lot safer. I'm just gonna use this one just because it's a little bit easier. Okay, so I got that going. I blew this out, but it's still hot, so I always want you to put this in water for a minute and then you can throw it away. So you heard me use the sink, hopefully, and that's fine. With this one, because of the lamp oil, it's you can really notice a flame on this one. This one you can't because it burns really, really clean. So just kind of keep that in mind a little bit, and also try not to, you know, when you blow out your match, you know, don't blow out your candle at the same time. So this should be good. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not going to burn my iPad here, and I think we're all set. So next thing is we're going to attach our ring. So I stick this over top of this. I roll it back and forth, and I get this droplet of red wax at the tip of it. And I want to be able to, once I have that droplet, to stick it on to my ring like that. And I want to make sure that it stays. It won't stay all the time, so you have to kind of check it. So I let that cool down. It's fine. I pull. I'm not pulling really hard, but I feel like it does have, you know, a pretty good feel to it. Now I also like taking my X-Acto knife or one of my wax carving tools, and I can heat this up. And I can kind of press that wax into that area just a little bit. Just to make sure that it stays. So I just grab some of that red wax, not much of it, and I just make sure I seal it in. You don't always have to do this, but if you're having trouble, sometimes it just makes it a little bit easier. So that one's all set. I'm going to do that again on this next one. Going to get that hot, rotate it. I have that droplet there. I let it sit, I let it cool. Pull on a little bit, I'm gonna heat this up and just kind of work that wax into the other wax just a little bit, make sure it seals real good. Now, you don't want to ruin your design by doing this, because I'm just tacking that in and make sure that's really secure. So these are set. Okay, I have my sprue base out. I have my clay here. I kind of took it. Let me set this off to the side. I'm going to roll this because I want to get a coil that'll fit. I bring it back to middle school days. Stick a coil in there, and then I just kind of push down, and it just seals it like that. Okay. Next is that you need to weigh these. Actually, you can check them first to make sure that you have enough. So I'm going to push this in like that, and you're going to notice that your flask will sit inside of this area. So sometimes it's going to be really tight, but you just kind of pull this around the whole side, and you push down on it, and it'll attach. Now you can see that my ring, the distance between like here and the top of my ring right there, you know, is like a good inch. So this is really good. You're not gonna have a problem with this one. If your ring gets up to like in this area, you know, along that, you're gonna have some more problems, because if you don't fill the entire thing with plaster, you'll have something called a blowout, and all of your metal will go out of there because it blew out of your casting. Now, some mistakes, I know that it's not your fault, and other ones are your fault and you have to redo it. So if you have a blowout, that one's your fault, because you put way too much on here, and if you want to get a good grade on the assignment, then you'll have to end up redoing it. So I know that one's gonna fit, and I'm gonna stick the next one in. and you can kind of see that they never touch. You know, there's some spacing between it. You know, they're almost at the same height, so I know that we're good. I'm gonna take both of these out. So that was to check, make sure that my sprues were long enough. I'm gonna take my weighing machine, turn this on. Okay, I'm making sure that it's zeroed out, the arrow's on the G. I'm gonna stick both of these onto this, and then I'm gonna grab a scrap sheet of paper. I have these on my desk. You only want half of it, because you're gonna end up setting it on top of your flask when you're all done. So first off, these are mine, so I'm gonna write down butcher. You would write down your name and your partner's name. The metal, I will do this one in brass, and this is 2.4. Okay, so I have that. I'm gonna set that off to the side. That's a way of telling me what you need to do. Shut that off so I don't wear the battery out. Stick these back inside of here. Okay, I have them all the way down. I know they're nice and secure. I'm gonna put them on the flask. Again, kind of pull that rubber sprue base around, make sure it gets on there nice and tight. Push that in, and I'm all set to do the plaster part. Okay, now I'm all set to put the plaster in. I have my flask, I have my notes. I have one of these little containers. I have them usually up in the sink area on that top shelf. And then I'm gonna kind of get my supplies out. So I'm gonna grab the machine that vibrates so it can be able to get all the air bubbles off of it. I'm gonna plug it into the power strip that's over to the side here. Okay, now that I have this plugged in and I have everything ready, I'm gonna get the plaster that's down here. Now the plaster the lid on it does have the instructions in terms of the ratio that you need to be able to have on it. It says 1 1/3 cup investment, that's what the plaster is, and 2/3 water. It says water first, investment second. So I need 2/3 cup of water. So in the container, you're gonna find a bag and you're gonna find this little scoop, and the scoop is 1/3 of a cup. So I'm gonna get the water on here first. I'm gonna dry this off because I don't want water inside the investment because you get these chunks on it. So I want to kind of stay away from that. Okay, next it says 1 1/3 cup of investment. Okay, that means how many of these? This is 1/3, I need 1 1/3. Doing the math. Okay, hopefully you got that. So I need 4 cups of this, okay? Because 3 1/3 is 1, and then you have the extra on there. So I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna kind of dig in, and it should be level on top. So you can take like a pair of scissors, I might have like a butter knife in there or something. I'm gonna kind of go in and just kind of scrape the top of this off. So I have an even mix. So there's 1. 2. 3. And our last one is 4. Okay. I'm gonna mix this up. You might always, depend on how this was, I mean, honestly, you're supposed to like weigh these. That's the best way of doing it. So it might be a little thin, it might be a little thick. This is not an exact science. I'm just gonna take my finger and start stirring this around. Okay, the way that you know that you have the right consistency on this is when you take your fingers and you go down, you pull back up, it kind of sits on top and then sinks right away. This one's a little on the thin side, so I'm gonna go back in, grab just a little bit more. So this is not a full one, this is like a half. I'm gonna try to use a quarter of it. and stir that around. I do have larger containers of these. There are 2 of them that are up there. So use the larger ones, not the smaller ones. I have a lot of small ones, but these are just a little on the small side to be able to do this, because I'm kind of spilling more than I want to out of this. But it'll work for this demonstration. Okay, this is getting a lot better. You have to mix the investment up after everything is set, because this stuff does set pretty quick. Okay, pick this up. See, it kind of sits up there for a second. If I can zoom in, if I haven't yet already, and you can kind of see the way that it sits and then sinks right away. So this is good. I'm going to take this. I don't want to pour directly onto the rings itself. I want to kind of pour off to the side the best that I can, so I can squeeze this, get around the ring, and I'm all the way to the top. If you need a little more, a lot of times you can squeeze your finger on here and get the rest of it out. Otherwise, take all the excess and dump it down into the garbage, okay, not in the sink. Make sure in the sink there's a little sponge that's actually in the hole here. You'll find these like half-cut sponges. I want this sitting inside of where the water goes in the drain, so then the excess doesn't go into the drain itself. So I have that in the sink. I may take this, I'm gonna just sit this in here right now. Get my hands wiped up. This is where your partner can do that, and then the other person can go over here. So next I'm gonna get this set. I do like to have a little rag or a sponge kind of sitting on top of this, and setting this right here. And I'm gonna turn this on, and I'll go all the way over to high. What this is doing right now is, I don't know if you can zoom in and see this, but it has all these little bubbles that are coming off of it. What that is it's shaking. I'm gonna turn this down just a little bit, probably, I don't know, like an 1/8 of a turn. What it's doing is, when you pour that stuff in, what happens sometimes is that little air bubbles attach themselves to the ring. And then if you try casting it, those bubbles will become pockets of empty space, which will get filled with metal. So 2 problems. One is, all of a sudden your 2.4 is meaningless because you're filling up all that negative space, and you might not have enough metal to cast your ring. That's a big problem. The other problem is, you'll have these, and you'll still have them a little bit anyways, you'll have these little air pockets that'll turn to metal, and you have to file them off. So it's just more work. So we do this for about a minute. Okay, that's good. Next thing I want to just kind of look for is, I'm looking for anything purple or anything blue floating. Okay, I wonder if you can figure out what that means. If that happens, first off, I'm sorry. That happens sometimes. Your sprue might have been dislodged, from the clay, or maybe your ring wasn't attached to the sprue well enough, and that's floating. But you got to dump all this stuff out in the garbage, rinse everything off, and you got to start over again. Your measurements are fine, but you just make sure that you take care of that right away. So look for the blue or the purple thing floating. Look for a weird bump all of a sudden, and then you just have to go from there. Next, this just sits on top of here. And it'll end up just kind of sticking to there, and then I take it off. When I'm going to be casting it. And what you're going to do next is, you're going to take this, and ask me, because it just changed from year to year. I might have you just leave it on this black table. I might have you put it in the back room where we end up bringing them out, or something like that. And I think we're all done. So good luck on that. Make sure everything gets cleaned up. Leave that sponge in that sink. I take care of that, or my TAs take care of that later, just so we don't have that stuff going down. So, okay, thank you very much, and good luck on the project.